Well, thank you so much for being with me, Hassan.
Pleasure, pleasure.
Um, you're in London, I'm in Bristol. Um,
Yes.
I must say it's an honor to speak to you, but it's also a pure pleasure because I feel we have a lot in common. My family's from
Okay.
Algeria. I was born
I
in
was
Paris
asked. I
and
was
then
asked.
moved to London. And
Okay. You look North African. That's why I was like, Melissa, was you born in France?
yes, I was born in Paris in like the 20e arrondissement. So
Well, okay. And then how comes the name Melissa? Because I have my assistant, her name is Jenny, she's Algerian. Uh,
yeah,
the- my assistant before, she's Algerian, her name was, what was her name? It was like a French name as well, Elizabeth. And I
British name as well.
realized,
Yeah.
when I realized that the parents that came there, like in the 60s, they kind of named their kids more European names.
Yeah, there's
And
a
they,
lot of reasons for that in my case. I don't want to bore you with my personal story,
yeah,
but
yeah,
basically,
but
my dad had me quite late, right? It was 45, and he's a Kabyle, so he doesn't speak Arabic. And he moved to
okay,
Paris when he was a teenager because he lost his dad because of political reason when he was very young, 12, I think.
okay,
And so he moved to Paris in the 50s before the independence war. So I
yeah,
think it was a bit detached from the culture because he was alone without his mom, his
mm,
siblings. And
yeah,
when he had me, my mom had another name for me, but his boss studied in America. He went to Harvard, and he was very proud
okay,
of his boss. He was an architect, and so he always told him, "Melissa is a beautiful name. It's very popular in America." And I think my
yeah,
dad just really wanted to give me not a French name, but some sort of like destiny name to
yeah, that, exactly.
go beyond the world and go beyond the village. So
Yeah,
that's
well,
really fun.
I think the same stories my friends. They were sort of, Elizabeth end up in the village, so, an Algerian family, like with a small farm. And Jenny, grandma was Algerian, the mum was Algerian, and the father was French. And so it was all this kind of thing. And I think there was a part where they wanted to name the kids this as well, so when they grow up, they can mix in, in the sense not to have a funny name as well. So yeah, but I think everybody, like you said, different stories.
I think, but I've given a lot of thoughts about it. Also, because Melissa's a Greek name, and I studied ancient Greek, and my best friend was half Greek, and so I think that kept a link with the Mediterranean side of
Yeah.
our family. But also, I believe that it's much harder in France to have like a Muslim name. Like people are not
Yeah.
very. In the 80s, I was born in 1980. It was quite obvious then, people really
Then yeah,
wanted
yeah.
to.
Then the 60s and stuff. Yeah, totally.
So it depends on, like, my dad's lost a lot of people during the war because they were all pro-independence. So I think because he had me so late, he was like, maybe it's time to move on from this story. And
Yeah,
he was not religious. He didn't speak Arabic, for instance, because he went from his Kabyle village to Paris when he was young. So he never learned Arabic. Where would he learn? Not in school, because at the time it was a colonial French school. And then in Paris, he wouldn't learn Arabic. So he only speaks his Berber language, and he didn't want me to learn because he didn't want me to have an accent, etc., etc. But I guess it's different for you because you've always been in between Morocco and Europe.
I mean, I was born in Morocco, so I came here at the age of 13. So it's different. Some like, one the birth there and growing up in London, and London growing up totally in London, not outside London. So it's like you being in Paris. It's not growing up in the south of France. So yeah, so those things have come out in my work, in my lifestyle,
Yeah.
and in my character. Yeah.
But how is it for you to use all these kind of symbols and colors from Morocco, from North Africa? Because you were one of the first to do that in London. It was obviously London is a much more multicultural city than Paris. You have like influence from Bangladesh, India, Nigeria, America. So it might be just a way for you to get noticed. But how did it start?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably that, I mean, first coming to London in the 70s, not speaking English. So I think the first stage is like settling and adjusting. London was a different time, different world, not just London, but all around the world. Yeah, you had a different type of mix here because obviously they had people that they ruled, like India, China, Caribbean and stuff. So my first friends were from this background, and because I was the only Moroccan kid at school and the only Moroccan kid in the neighborhood, so I felt more closer to somebody who looked similar to me or had the same story. They come in trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And I think in the 80s, we sort of wanted to be part of, we was part of London. So everybody, all my friends, some became a cook, somebody became a photographer, video maker, fashion designer, music, blah, blah, blah. So because we didn't have places to go to, we didn't have, a place to hang out, to express. We was hanging out in the street, in the corners, because there was no youth clubs for us and stuff like that. So I think that's when it became a melting point. As far as all the colours and stuff, I suppose growing up in Morocco, it's very bright, very colourful place. So there's a memory of that, and we're not scared of colour. And growing up in London, I always say it was like film noir. It's, it's very much dark, grey. So it's almost coming from a Technicolor country to a film noir country. And I think in my work, it's probably escapism as well, escaping the moment. So, when I'm shooting, I'm in that moment of dressing up somebody else or, finding a colourful backdrop. So I think it has, all these elements of the journey.
That's quite amazing though, because it's very unique. And compared to a lot of other artists who are very multicultural and very vocal about social and political issues, there's a lot of joy in your work, right? It's more about celebrating uniqueness.
Yeah,
just
I
complaining about anything.
Yeah, proudness, unique, also a journey, not just of me, people that I grew up with around me, that influenced me, that, I've had a relationship with friends. So I think it's partly that. And also there's everything in there. Hopefully there's a bit of politics, there's a bit of, religion, there's a bit of, the sort of people that have been moved around and scattered over the globe, because we're the first generation that's been happened to that, where we can travel and, as I say, I have friends from all over different parts of the globe. I grew up in London. That probably wouldn't have that kind of thing if I just grew up in London. So there's that, apart from having a pretty picture, hopefully the images long term, they can stand, capture a moment and document. It's all that, documenting as well.
Can you share with us how it started for you to want to be an artist? Were your parents supportive? Did you start with one medium in particular? Did you go to art school, or
No.
No.
Growing up, I left school at 15 in England, no qualifications. We was the kind of kids I grew up with myself. We was very uncomfortable to go to a museum or a gallery. That was a world far away from us. If you put us in front of a piece of work, we wouldn't even know how to stand in front of a piece of artwork in the gallery or museum. And it wasn't cool for us. That was sort of some another world. But, as I grew up in London after leaving school, I just had all these creative people around me. It was happened naturally. It wasn't planned. It wasn't planned. I had friends that studied photography, film. So, these friends were like actually preparing themselves, knowing what they wanted to do and learning technically and historically about the arts. I was coming from, I always did so many different things. I used to do lots of parties in London, which meant I would find a space, decorate it, put a DJ, a band. This was learning. And then on top of this, I had a small boutique in London selling, I suppose, it's called streetwear in 1984 called Rap. And it's become a meeting point for lots of friends, creative friends who would come and hang there with Central London. And in the basement, I had a record shop, selling to DJs. And then I met a friend of mine, Zach Ovo, is an artist, is a very good friend of mine. He was doing like music videos, so I worked with him, sort of doing casting, location and stuff like that. And then another friend of mine he just started his career doing styling, fashion stylist. So I worked with him for magazines, catwalk shows, and then I had the shop. So this was I always say in the interviews, this was my sort of my university, learning about production, people, and then all the influences, music, fashion, art and stuff like that. And this really came in my work. It wasn't planned. It just happened. I have an idea and I go and do it. And then as I was sharing my work, I started to understand myself, the kind of art I'm doing and my influences. And it really has the journey of my sort of growing up here in Morocco.
So in a way, it's very close to the artist from Bristol that I wrote about, because I spent a few years writing about the cultural scene here, and from
like who?
3D doing graffiti and tricky rapping. They all didn't go to university, and they made their own counterculture up until Banksy. Do you have like a special interest in that part of
Yeah, well,
Bristol
I mean,
history.
it's funny saying that because I know Nelly, he's from Bristol, who is a very good friend of mine.
Lele
And
Hopper.
Nelly,
Oh, really? A
yeah,
good friend.
yeah, yeah, he used to come to my parties. He'd done the Soul to Soul album, which Jazzy is a very good friend of mine. He's from
Yes.
Camden. So Nelly, I know very well, and I met Nelly in early '80s. He
Yeah.
used to bring mixed tapes from
Yes.
Bristol, so I got loads of old mixed tapes. And then I met Daddy, what's his name? Daddy G. And then I was a big fan of Ronnie Size.
Mhm.
I went up to Bristol a few times back in the late '80s. So there's a nice connection, and we used to have a clash. The Bristol guys would come down. I used to
Yes.
run a club. One of my first clubs in 1981, and they used to do a clash here between London, the sound systems, and Bristol. So for me to have a show in Bristol, it's a very special moment for me.
Wonderful. So can you tell us a bit more about why this show? What was your idea behind the path?
Uh, the path. So the path was really basically the show is like half half. There's one part of the show, images from Morocco that I grew up with, and the stuff like that, and the other half is me in London, and the people from London in the pictures are basically like friends. I have Helene, who's a Brazilian capoeirista. What's in Kamal, who's like half Chinese as jazz musician. There's sort of the poetic what they call, so I've forgotten the names, my brain's gone. These two Jamaican girls who are Muslims, they're like rappers. And really when this show started in Cardiff, and it was during the period of Brexit, and for me, oops, yeah. So yeah, you got the images there, brilliant. So yeah, so this is the Moroccan side, Dior. So, what was I saying? So I was just going to say at some point there about. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, and, yeah. So the show started in Cardiff, and when I came up with the show, one of the ideas for the London side was, I saw Brexit was about division, what they were trying to do, divide people. And then I thought, we're part of the thread of London, England, all the people from all over the globe that we all put in something. So I chose a group of friends from musician, capoeira master, all sorts of people, and I put this together. And the path, the title, is actually came from an album that I bought in the '80s that it took me about 6 months to buy to find, and it's called The Path, obviously, and it's by Ralph McDonald. And one side of the album is one track. Normally the album you have 6 to 8
Yeah.
tracks on one side. It's one track, and it's the evolution of African music. So it starts on the African continent, and it crosses over to the Atlantic to the Caribbean. And for me, that's what I saw with these friends. They're from all over the place. They've crossed over somewhere, and we landed in this space. So that's really part of the show. So it's a journey of me, my path, Moroccan, bringing that Moroccan side of the work, and then landing in London, meeting all these incredible characters, and bringing that into the mix. So that's really I suppose the meaning of the show.
That's brilliant. You were
Thank
saying at
you.
the beginning that you were the only Moroccan kid in the streets when you were growing up. But do you feel
Yeah.
like it's changed a lot? Because for me, obviously, I came from France, so I didn't grow up here, but I feel like North Africa is completely misunderstood in the UK. It's like there's all these cliches about Marrakesh, maybe, and the
Yeah.
sun, and the appetite for gold or shiny parties. But there's a lot of complexity in North Africa as well. And when I started at the BBC, North Africa was always classified as the Middle East, while Maghreb in Arabic obviously means West. So I
Yeah.
feel like there's so many paths, to use your word, to explain how North Africa is changing, and also how much of a platform it is between the rest of Africa and Europe and the Middle East and the West, etc. So is it important to you?
Well, I mean, like what you said. I mean, it's definitely changed from when I landed in London to where it is now, because people travel and the social media and stuff like that, and people growing up in more of a mixed society, let's say, like the big cities. But for like, if you take, I suppose, like France, they will understand North African culture more than some of the European countries, because we have a relationship with it, negative or positive. There's some relationship. And England will understand the Caribbean and Indian, Chinese, because this is what they've ruled for a long time. and they have that kind of familiarity with them, with this, with these kind of cultures. Being Moroccan, North African in London, some of my early work was really to kind of to show something that we can be cool, we can be sexy, we can have something, intellectual, we can be all this, because North Africa, sadly enough, was left in Europe in the 80s. It was the memory of hippies, of a kaftan, of a desert, of hashish, of a camel, of a date. So that was, in the 80s, when I was growing up in the 70s, 80s, that was what people remember because of the hippie era. But I think it's changed a little bit. There's definitely more open people traveling. Like you said, Marrakesh has become this exotic place, this, Orientalist dream ideas of seeing the blind beggar and the snake charmer and blah, blah, blah. But we do have that there. There is part of that there. We do have the dates and the camels, but we're beyond that. So what I've tried to do with my work in the past, especially when I'm shooting people from our background, is really to highlight something strong, positive, still have that culture, still have the past, trying to have now something future in the work. So I think this is something normal. It's growing up, and sometimes you have to educate people yourself. Like I'm sure you growing up partly here to France is different, compared to France in the sense. But then maybe a Caribbean person growing up in Paris would be different, because there's more African people from the African continent that will, just I'm saying, they're African still. There's that difference, because they're Caribbean or African American in Paris is going to be different to an African from Senegal and New York. Just I'm saying, and this is not. I think this is normal. So was that did I answer the right thing to
Yeah,
the question?
you
I can't remember the
you
question.
totally answered the question. It's just an interesting debate for me, because I do find that obviously being from North Africa, it's like somehow being constantly some sort of a historian of the region, because there's so much mystery about it in England. While in France, there's this idea that you don't really talk about where you come from. It's people are not comfortable with that. They're all trying to pretend they're all French.
Well, it's interesting, because the other thing I could add to the mix, because we're North African, so we're on land, the continent of Africa. That's one, all right. And within our land, our people think they want to consider themselves as being African. They want to consider themselves more Arab or more European. The Europeans also consider North Africa more Arabs in a sense, and some of the African countries see Morocco and North Africa as more Arabs than being African. Yeah. So you have these points from all over coming in, from different parts. And then the Middle East, they look at us sort of the mongrels of the Arabs, because we're not Middle Eastern. But then somebody in Europe will put the Morocco and Algeria and North Africa in the mix of Middle East, in part of the Middle East. So there's all these kind of things. But I think at the end of the day, you have to be proud of, if you're content with yourself, and you can put that energy, it's like I see myself as a free person of the earth first. I was born in Morocco. I'm Moroccan. I'm proud. I'm also North African. I'm African somehow. Maybe the color skin or the language stuff might not considered some people's ideas of how they think of an African person is, or he or she, whatever. So I'm comfortable with that. And for me, I've definitely seen the changes the last, let's say, 10 years with doing shows. I've been, and I was always very happy to be like in African group shows, because then it opens up the door. It means there's an acceptance, because sometimes, when they have group show of African, they just think of like middle of Africa, West Africa. So there's a little bit of change there,
Yeah, for me, it's a very interesting issue. And we have a project about African artists with the Arnolfini. And as a Berber, and I, as a foreign correspondent who lived for a while in East Africa and in Central Africa, I was based in Nairobi, which is in another way very Arab as well. Mombasa and Zanzibar have had this huge Muslim influences. And I think 30% of the population in Kenya is Muslim, and probably even more in Tanzania. Since I've left Paris, I kind of felt more African than North African. But I think also, I don't know if you've probably been to 154, and because the founder is from Morocco as well, she's done something that I really rate, is that using North Africa as this sort of bridge between sub-Saharan Africa, which is probably less known because there's less European tourists going to, let's say, the Congo, or maybe Senegal is a bit of an exception, but going to Nigeria, for instance, is a bit difficult. There's different visa issues, while going to Kenya is very much easier because they have the national parks. So I kind of like this idea that maybe we can go back to the past. Is also like the yellow brick road. There'll be different steps in a way, and for me, North Africa has become like it's in the middle of everything. That's absolutely fascinating. The west, the east, the north, the south, the global south, Islam in the west, and there's a lot of people in North Africa who are not Muslims, but we never talk about them.
Well,
Like,
it's the landscape where North Africa is. Like if you think of like in the olden days, it was we're at the end of the corner of Africa, the entrance to Europe, and also it was the entrance to the Mediterranean, and Mediterranean Sea was the most important sea then, because everything had to go through that channel between south of Spain and North Africa, which is only like 12 kilometers.
Yes.
So it meant people, the ships would have to stop to get fresh water, do business. So it was a very I can't pronounce the word, but it was a very important place. And this is why at one point you had different people ruling. You had the Moors, went all the way to Sub-Sahara, all the way to, almost south of France. So there's history there, but, people forget history. So some people only see their history from their point of view and stuff like that. But, like even like you said, Touria is a good friend of mine from 154. And, I saw her, before she done 154, I went to a few meetings when she was trying to find sponsors and people. And she found it a little bit hard because, one, her complexion, and people didn't believe in her. They were expecting this should be somebody maybe dark skin or from, like you said, the middle of Africa and stuff like that. But I'm so proud of her because she fought and she's presented something positive, and she's taking it back to Marrakesh, which is the beginning of taking back a show that's an African show back to Africa, and hopefully she can take it other countries in Africa.
Yeah, definitely. As you were saying, I'm also very proud of her also because she's a woman, and we know it's not always easy, and she's so.
We should do an interview with her. She'd be a great one.
Definitely. I interviewed her a couple of years ago in London when I went with people. We definitely tried to do a trio and add to this. Hopefully she could come to Bristol. That would be amazing if she could come here, because that could spark an interesting conversation. But there is a lot of this problem of like who represents Africa today. And as you were saying, a lot of people are trying to ignore history, but you know what, 2020 is not going to give a lot of people opportunity to forget history anymore. So to me, it's exciting.
But so history is always told from their point of view, whoever. So at the moment, America's problems going on. It's like let's say the white Americans, they're telling their history, but they also they came from somewhere else. So but they only go back to that point of time. So they're not going back prior to that, or Australia with the Aborigines and the people that are there. So then you can go on, and it's a bit like that all over.
Yeah, and the English came from Germany. There's all this sort of funny part of history now. It makes our culture so interesting, but that have been reduced to a fine line by newspapers or politicians. So we're going beyond this point. You've done a lot this past 12 months. You've
like last 40 years, I think. It hasn't stopped. Yeah. Alhamdulillah, we'll say alhamdulillah. Yeah.
What are you working on at the moment?
It's I mean, I had loads of things coming up. I had obviously the show in Bristol. I had like 2 solo shows in New York. We're going to be running concurrent with each other in September. Obviously, that stopped. I was working on another big project with Soul DXB. I don't know if you know them, in Dubai. They do this big festival to do like more sort of young culture to do with sneakers, basketball, and all this kind of stuff with music. They're coming up to 10 years now, and it's one of the sort of hip, cool festivals in Dubai. So last year I was there. I was shooting at people like Wu-Tang Clan and Coffee and all this kind of stuff. So that, and then I was supposed to have a show in South Korea, which now they're still going to do it in August, which I was really surprised. So I'm working on that now. I'm in the studio with my brother, organising that to ship next month. But really, all the projects stopped. So at the moment, I'm at home. I'm also doing the last year, I would say last year I've been working on a tea brand, which is
Nice.
which is very bizarre. It started, life could be full of surprises.
Definitely.
Um, so I'm in the middle of doing the website with the team, and just getting it ready basically to launch sometime soon. And within that came a space in Marrakesh, a partnership with a tea man in Marrakesh who's becoming the almost number one tea producer in the world. So we're doing this project together. So we're doing tea, probably coffee, and then I've just got the space, and within the space, going to have a tea room and also a gallery,
In
which is
Marrakesh?
exciting. So, in Marrakesh, yeah,
In London or in Marrakesh?
no, Marrakesh, in the industrial area. It's where all these factories are, so it's perfect. Um, so yeah, that's a lot of work. So basically, I'm designing the space. So I've got the builders on site and stuff like that, and then I'm working with the graphic designers, and so I'm doing that. I'm editing some work. I've got to send some pictures I took in Abu Dhabi. So I'm doing that. I'm doing also launching like a clothing label called Andy Wello, which used to be the bar in Paris. So I'm doing a collaboration with I don't know if you know Patta from Holland.
Yeah.
Patta. Yeah, so I'm doing that with them, and these friends of mine called Art Come First. They're sort of kind of edgy designers, African kids. Yes, I've been really working on these. I'm sort of busy at home, and I'm cleaning up, my shop, my studio, and blah 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 blah. So I'm busy. It just sadly enough, this was happened obviously with the virus. It's sort of I'm happy to be, I can do this for a year if I can pay my bills, but I don't want it to be on to have this virus for me to be, I rather would have had my own choice to said, okay, next 6 months I'm just doing this. So yes, I'm like everybody else, adjusting. You have a good day and a bad day, and stuff like that. And last week was difficult because it felt hopeless. I'm working at home and then seeing what's happening in America. I have lots of friends in the States and living even in in Brooklyn. We'll have a call. I can hear the march outside, and you feel like you're hopeless. And sometimes when that happens, everything you're doing feels like pointless. So last week was a really tough week because I had commitments, and I had to dig deep in myself to stay positive and
Yeah.
stuff. And at the same time, like, why? What for? You almost feel like just
Yeah.
say, pardon my language, fuck it.
Yeah, because of
But
course,
yeah.
yeah, the problem is that we've seen that so many times over, right? I was working with a film company that did that film on James Baldwin, I Am Not Your Negro, and he was already saying in the 60s, how much longer shall we wait until, the privileged people are ready for
Yeah.
change? And now people are always telling us again, you should wait, it takes time. And
The
as an
problem is,
artist, obviously,
yeah. Well, the problem is, whatever way it's going to take time. It's going to take. If you look at, from the '60s to now, nothing has changed, and this things changed, but not, analyze it, nothing has changed. So I think all these kind of things will, it's like what's happening right now. The change we want, the 100%, we might only get like 10, 18%, 20% of the change because they're under pressure, and they would change what immediate to simmer things down, and then I hope not, then maybe some other shit would happen again to make, and it's almost like and sometimes it is a bit like that because it's unless we have a crash like the virus where it's just bang revolution.
yeah, a lot of
So
people, a lot of political analysts predicts a summer of protest all over the world.
yeah,
We
yeah,
have protests in South America, like in Chile, in
yeah.
India. There was a lot of protests before the lockdown happened, and now it's America, and now it's
Uh,
here in England as well.
yeah, because it goes beyond just black and white. It goes deeper. It's deeper. It's highlighting the problems of human beings, the have and the have-nots. The people that small percentage that have a lot, and a lot of people don't have. So that's massive gap. And I think the next 6 months, there's more people going to be unemployed, more business going to close, and this will highlight. And people have time because they're at home, and they're going to get bored staying at home. So when you unleash them, they will unleash themselves physically and mentally and say stuff. So it's an interesting year, you know.
Yeah.
And there needs to be some changes from this. There need to be some changes, you know.
Yes. I personally, as a cultural writer, believe that artists usually are ahead of the change. So a lot of people have already been addressing the, the issue, the lack of fundings, for instance, in very wealthy country like the US and the UK, artists have to basically find their own money. And I don't know if you know of Kader Atia, the French Algerian artist,
Who?
is based in
Yeah,
Berlin.
yeah,
Kader is
yeah.
given an interview to talk about La Colonie, which is a bar where he gives a lot of
Yeah,
talks.
I've been there actually. I've done shows with him, so I know exactly who he is. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that place. So just to
Yeah.
explain, it's a cafe in Paris near Gare du Nord where people can just come for a fun night and a drink, but also a lot of free, completely open to the public conferences
Yeah.
about colonial
I've,
history
I've,
and political debates.
I've, yeah, I've been in there a few times actually when I've been in Paris, so I know the place exactly.
Yeah, my dream is to have a little version in Bristol one day.
Do it,
Yeah, I'm
seriously.
gonna talk
But
to
also,
Kader. We're really good friends.
it's nice to see it also from the females point of view, yeah. And I think
But,
it's a really important thing to do. You know what I'm saying? Because you have all these things that we're talking about, your background and you know your interest. And I think it's not hard to do that. You know, an old railway arch or something like that.
yeah,
Go and
and
squat.
the difference, I guess, sometimes between man and woman is like, I don't need to have my own enterprise. I don't need to have my own place. I can just be an itinerant talker in any place who wants to have our, space
Yeah,
for us to come over. So obviously we can do a lot online. But what I like with your project and the fact that you're finally going to come to Bristol is like, it's a response, right? We're not there to just complain about how many people die, how many people suffered for so many generations. I think a lot of people underestimate how much people of color, as we're called, it's probably the less horrible expression we have, because colors are beautiful things, right? um, we have actually a lot of responses. I know a lot of people in France telling us, oh, you're always talking about the negative, and I'm like, I think it's the opposite way around. You don't want to change, and we're always popping up with new ideas of how we could change, how we could live together, because we do live together, and it's unsustainable to live. And as you were saying, the have-nots always suffering, and the have-nots now are mostly the people of colors, whether you're indigenous a family in North America, or African American with a history of slavery or colonial past, but we're the vast majority, are we not, in the world? The Chinese, the Indians, the Asians, the Arabs, the
yep.
Africans,
But
Latin
you know,
Americans. So we're just offering you ways to discuss. And I think this, with your show, there's so much positivity. It's about joy, it's about being alive, it's about including everybody. And
yes. Well, I mean, I hope you know because of what's happening now. I hope it adds something to what's happening now as well, because I think it's very important. Because maybe if I had to redo the show, maybe I would think differently. But I still think there's elements there that can talk to what's going on now, and it's about more togetherness. And you know, one of the things you said just now, you know, there's um, I've been listening to the radio and having discussions with friends and stuff. And one interesting thing I think at the moment, you know, because if you look at the protesters last few days, it's been like, you know, like one black face to 10 white faces. So it's incredible. There's so many white people, European people going protesting. And this is really good because this generation that protest, and let's say in general, they're a culture that's growing up on black culture, who traveled, who've had an Indian, who might have a kebab, who've had, you know what I'm saying, who some have listened to Arabic music, if they didn't win it, or African music. So they're a different white generation. I don't want to talk about colors, but if we go down this route, to like, let's say the white generation in the 50s or 60s globally.
yeah.
So this is very important to see this happening because they're partly will make a change as well.
Mm.
And on top of that, it's also acceptance. So, for example, you know, as a male, you know, living in London, and I'm talking to all my friends from different color skin, you know, if I'm walking down the street, even now, and it's a quiet street, and there's a woman coming down, a European woman, I'll guarantee if it's a quiet street, she'll either cross to the other side or somehow you see her holding a bag, even if she's walking, even if we're walking in front and behind. So I've had to sometimes read this and cross the road before to make that uncomfortable situation. But this is just a small thing, but it can go in so many things. Walking into the airport, a restaurant, a clothing shop, you know, especially like a youth or like 3 kids walking down the road who probably go university, but, you know, because they're black kids wearing certain clothes, they get, you know, people get scared or they will be read differently and stuff like that. And this becomes to acceptance. Like, we also have to become like a psychologist, understand the problems, how they will feel to make it comfortable for them. But yet, we're still a misunderstanding to them by the hair, the color, tone of skin, the language, a religion. And we're at that point, we want to pass that. If we pass that, there'd be like some kind of positiveness happening, because then it becomes like on one level. It doesn't matter about black, white, Arab, Muslim, Jewish, da 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 da. So for me, this is an interesting thing to see, you know, and I'm seeing these young kids going out, especially white kids, and I'm very proud to see that. And I can see they had also had enough. You know, they want change. They don't want to see another black kid getting killed and then, you know, the getting arrested for, or, you know, stop and search, or, you know, you had to be this, or, you know, you're a gang and stuff like that. So this is to do acceptance, and it's not our problem, it becomes their problem. If that makes sense.
It's so true. It's speaking to me so directly, because in Paris, I lived in Barbès,
Yeah,
and we're a bit of a special part of Paris, and I have many friends who wouldn't want to come or wouldn't want to come late at night. And I love the place, and I walk a lot there, and a lot of people come to me, like they follow me in the street, like young guys who just arrived from Morocco or Algeria, or people who are coming to do their PhD in France, and they're like, oh, I can talk to this woman, and they all share their experience of rejection, right? Because people
yeah,
feel that they would be a threat if they get in touch with us, or if they stay too long surrounded by Arab or African guys in this neighborhood, because it has this reputation. And I always told my friends, you know, even poverty is not the crime. You know, people can have less than you, but they're not going to threaten you in the street. They're just, you know, it's just different from you, and you can come over. I also know a lot of African people who are like a bit more middle class, journalists or diplomats, who say, I don't want to come to La Goutte d'Or, Barbès, because
yes,
it gives them a misrepresentation of who I am as an African. I don't want to be associated with those poor immigrants. I'm a dignified man from West Africa, wherever.
yeah,
So I feel like, you know, people see a lot of suffering in these experiences, but I think we're all learning from it, right? It's
yeah, yeah,
like a physical, it's a embodied discussion about
yeah,
how we get in touch with each other. And obviously there's a lot of issues with being a man or being a woman, because you
yeah.
can have the same danger in the street, but art can
And,
address that differently.
and generation gap, you know, like our parents will think different to me, to my son, to my kid. He's growing up in a different time. Even if I'm thinking I can understand, there's definitely some new things, a different gap, different way of thinking and stuff like that.
Very
But
much so. I don't know how it was for your parents, but for instance, my parents, they really wanted to integrate. So they would
well,
blow dry our hair, they would wear different clothes, they would never wear local clothes.
no,
But now the young people, they want to be proud, right? They want to
yeah,
wear,
yeah,
they
well,
want to wear, they want to have crazy hair.
yeah, yeah. My parents couldn't read and write. Yeah, and they're from a village originally. So
Yeah.
my dad, I used to be embarrassed. He always wear like a Moroccan hat, and he would wear a kandora at home. So I'd be very
Yeah.
embarrassed to bring my friends at the beginning. My mum always wore a hijab, you know. You know, she might wear like a European coat because it's cold and stuff like that. She probably would wear that in Morocco at that time anyway.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that, but you know, see the clothing. You know, my dad would wear like a coat, a European coat, and a pair of trousers, but the hat was Moroccan, and it was like so Moroccan. It was like, but you know, this generation gap in a sense. But I love Rue Lyon in Barbès.
Yeah, it's
I
a
did,
great street with all the cafes doing music.
yeah, I did a project there in 2010. Is it some Islamic Institute or
Yes.
I forgot? ICI,
Yes.
yeah, Islamic Cultural Institute.
Yes.
So I did a salon there, and it was during Ramadan. I spent there like 6 weeks working there during the summer,
During
and
the
it was
summer is the
alive.
best time to go.
It
Yeah.
was alive, and then I got to know the neighborhood, and I saw these different groups. There was the young kids by the park who would be hanging out and selling hash and weed. And then you come down through the streets, and like around the corner be all these 60, 50 smoking crack in the street. And you come down a little bit, then there was like the 28, 25, 30-year-old little kind of gangsters selling hash, weed, cocaine, and stuff like that. So I saw this kind of element, and I nearly had a fight with one, you know, because I used really on, as you know, it's a small street, and outside ICI, I used to sometimes to come out to get fresh air. I used to come and just stand outside for like 10, 15 minutes, have a tea, and which means I'm standing on the street. And right opposite, there used to be these group of guys, mainly African kids, hanging out. But there was one guy who looked Moroccan or Algerian, but I didn't know who he was at that point. And one day I came out, I was fasting Ramadan, you know, we was breaking the fast at nearly 10 o'clock there. It was about 6:30. I had paint all over because I was painting the space and stuff. I just came to have a break, and they were across the road, and he caught me looking at him, and then he looked at me, and he looked at me again, and I looked, you know, then I looked away, and then at one point he went, like he was on the bicycle, he said something, you know, it's like, what are you looking at, in the sense of body attitude. And then I just started staring, and he dropped the bike. He was on the bicycle in the middle of his group, about 8 of them, and he walked over to me. He was like about 6 foot. I'm quite short. He was like 6'2", and he came over and he started speaking in French. I don't speak French, but I understood saying what he's looking at. And I said in Moroccan, "What are you looking at as well?" I said, "Why are you looking at me? I can say the same thing to you." And he was shocked. He heard me speaking in Arabic, and he sort of eased down. And then the next day, we waved to each other, and 2-3 days later we waved properly at each other, and as days went by we started shaking hands and became a friend. So I went for the opening. I've got him and his friends to do the door. They were the security. And now I went there. I'm doing a project in Rue Lyon at the moment, but obviously the lockdown. I went back there 3 months ago in January, and to do a project there. And my idea is to shoot him, because what I was doing with them, I was going to give them a camera to shoot for a month and show it ICI. So, but that didn't happen. So I went back for this project because there's a new building open up in Rue Lyon. It's going to be like a studio, music, a residency. The guys out, Said his name. So I'm doing a big project with them to do a show there. But I wanted to shoot the original idea. So I went to ICI to see if those kids around there, especially that kid, because he's like 30 something, probably 35. And guess who was working the reception? Him. And he looked at me, Hassan. I was like, yeah, he's working there full time because he had a kid and he got a job there. So I started talking to him about this project. So originally I was supposed to go back there in France and spend a few days with him and his friends to explain to them and give him a camera and start this. And they're going to be so anyway. But that's I have a good memory, and I really want to do this project there. So when things open up, I'm jumping on that as well.
That's brilliant.
Anyway, yeah.
We'll bring change. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Nice to speak to you as well, Melissa.
When are you coming to Bristol? Do you have
I definitely. No, we don't. We're just waiting for them to ship the stuff because we have half the work here. And I think the next 2 or 3 weeks they'll probably give us some kind of dates of what and what. But I would, if they do the install, I would probably come for the day. I'll probably drive here. So if I do, you know what to do. Drop me a message in the next 2 weeks if you don't hear from me. Yes. And then I could let you know what's, just in case my head goes all over the place, and I can tell you, the dates hopefully.
Absolutely, I'll take some photos from the installation.
Brilliant. Well, let's keep in touch anyway. If you're, and after this, if you ever come to London, let me know as well. Yeah,
wonderful. I love London. Yeah, I was supposed to come, but obviously everything's been cancelled for now. But I'll come again soon.
All right. All right,
Melissa. Thank you very much. Have a great time.
Enjoy. You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.